Hello, everyone. I want to thank you, everyone, for joining this session today. Before further ado, let me introduce as the speaker for today. He's a visionary legal architect powering Africa's innovation boom, and his name is Mr. Oladimeji. He's a dynamic force in tech, investment, and startup law, renowned for transforming legal complexity into growth opportunities. As founder and principal partner of Law Savvy LP, he champions Africa's biggest startup investors and creates with razor-sharp expertise in venture capital, cross-border expansion, and high-stakes fundraising. A trusted strategist and scaling ventures, Mr. Oladimeji blends legal mastery with entrepreneurial vision, fueling the continent's next wave of disruptive innovation. So welcome, Mr. Oladimeji, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Uh, Good day, everyone. I trust you are doing great. Um, just a minute, please. It appears my slide is all right. All right, great. The slide is up. Awesome. All right. Good morning, everyone. I trust you are doing great. As Trevor's said, I'm Oladimeji Kuforiji. Ideally, I would start my presentations, with a joke. But with Trevor's introduction of me, he made me, sound so serious. So don't let me joke around. Let me just get straight into it and be serious. But on a lighter note, apart from being a lawyer, I'm quite a fun person, and yeah, I like to throw a little joke around. All right, so today I am saddled with the responsibility and privilege to talk about corporate governance for startups, and my focus would be on recommendations and best practice for startups in Africa. Um, so basically, when we talk about corporate governance, there is a wrong, would I say a myth or a wrong understanding that corporate governance practices or discussions around it should only be for large corporations. But in recent times, we've seen how rapidly the startup ecosystem is growing. um, Things around investment readiness, investment confidence, and investment across Africa in general. And we've seen that having a standard corporate governance structure and framework in place has undoubtedly um, made investors confidence in investing in startups in Africa, better. So it has therefore become, something recommended, to have in place for startups, no matter the size, of the company, early stage, mid stage, growth stage, big. Corporate governance is something that should be established and put in place. And that is what I will be doing today. And at the end of this training, this session, we I would ensure I do my best, and we would be able to one understand the importance of good governance. Here we'll learn the critical roles of effective governance in ensuring the long-term success and sustainability of a company. We would also be learning the essential governance principles and practices. I will do my best to introduce you to key governance principles and best practices that can be applied to startups environment. And lastly, our objective is developing strategies for effective board and shareholders management. And with this, I would provide guidance on establishing and managing effective boards and board of directors and shareholders relationship general. All right, let's get right into it. Um, Trevor has actually done much of the introduction, so don't let me do too much on this. So I'm Oladimeji Kuforiji, founder of Law Savvy. We're a modern law firm and advisory firm with focus for startups, investors, creatives, and growth stage businesses. Our link is there in the slide. You can just read up on us at your free time. All right. Let's go straight into it. Introduction to startup corporate governance. So, what do we understand by corporate governance? So, in the context for startups now. So, in general, corporate governance or governance refers to the framework of rules, practices, and processes by which startups is directed and controlled. So, in the general context, there are set of rules and principles that corporate organizations, companies in general, put in place to guide their day-to-day activities, to guide their decision-making processes, to put the right framework, people, and systems in place for the operation of the company. And generally, it encompasses the mechanism through which a startup's objective are set. What exactly is the business trying to achieve? How do we want to achieve it? What are the mechanisms we should put in place in order to reach this desired objective? So, um, a good governance structure, establish the relationship between the startup stakeholders and how performance is monitored. All right. What then is the importance of having one in place? Number one here is risk management. A proper corporate governance framework actually helps to mitigate risk by ensuring accountability and transparency in decision making. There are situations where when there is an effective board in place with the right committees and all, which we would get into that. There are level of expertise these people would have that would be able to identify whatever decision the company is trying to make, whether investment decision, whether product launch decisions, strategic partnership, and the likes, right? So the framework would actually help to identify these risks, to mitigate it, or the long run avoid it in total. What we have also seen in the startup ecosystem is that a strong corporate governance framework actually affects investors' confidence, right? We've seen that most companies that have great corporate governance structure in place, they have been able to increase investors' confidence in making and make it easier for them to raise capital. What's most so depending on the investors, right? We've seen investors that would ask, do you have a board? So before we can actually invest in this company, do you have a board of directors? Who are the members of your board, right? Because investors don't just they are not in the business of just throwing money around. They don't just invest in the business, they invest in the people. So investors want to see that my investment is going into capable hands. My investment is going into a company that has the great corporate governance structure, that has an effective and intellectual, board of directors that can make good decisions towards the investment that I've made. right? So we've seen that companies that establish good corporate governance framework, have been able to increase investors' confidence, thereby making their capital raise, early and seamless. Another importance is sustainable growth. Good governance lays the foundation for sustainable growth by fostering a culture of ethical conduct and compliance with the law. So, in this case, right, when a when a corporate governance framework is established, right, their decisions are not just made, rapidly or without being thoroughly, thought out. Decisions are actually decided by the board, right? So it fostered this culture of ethical conduct, right? Because um, a one single person in the company cannot just do an unethical process or an unethical conduct that would invariably affect the growth of the company. And corporate governance, apart from it just being a best practice system, in some particular sectors, it sees a compliance measure. So for startups in the fintech space, let's say those that are regulated by the central bank, for example, they're actually corporate governance filing, right? So it is not just it doesn't just sustain the growth; it is a compliance measure. And what they say about compliance is easy than than the failure of non-compliant. Another importance of good corporate governance is the long-term value creation. Corporate governance have been seen to ensure that these decisions are made with a focus on creating long-term value for shareholders and other stakeholders of the company. All right, so what then are the key governance principles and their application to startups? Number one, accountability. So accountability is a principle that says is establish a clear roles and responsibility to ensure accountability at all levels. And how is this achieved? How is this applied for startups? So let's take, for example, founders, right? And there are different levels to founders' relationships. So we can have the CEO, we can have the CTO. So when we have document like the founders agreement, these roles are actually defined. Who need to do what? Who need to oversee the day-to-day operation? Who is in charge of fundraising exercise? Who is in charge of speaking to investors, right? So corporate governance is saying all this, everyone needs to be accountable for their roles and responsibility. And how can you do this? By actually establishing well-written documents to spell out this level of roles and responsibilities so that everyone can be accountable. Another principle of corporate governance is transparency. And this is saying we have to ensure that all key stakeholders have access to accurate and timely information. So when we are looking at document like shareholders agreement, right? There is actually a clause, information right, that is you have to give periodic reporting or whenever a decision is being made, the key stakeholders or shareholders of the company need to know. So what this protect is um because you have a majority share in the company, you can't just solely, or maybe, oh, the company is your idea. You can't just single unilaterally make up a decision without carrying other stakeholders of the business along. So that is bad practice. So a good and standard corporate governance framework says and established that every decision making process needs to be transparent. everyone needs to know. That is why we have scenarios where you actually have to pass resolutions of the company to carry out some certain decisions in the company, right? Um, the next one is fairness. Another key governance principle is fairness, and this is saying that it is important to treat all stakeholders fairly and equitably. Everyone's interest must be balanced, right? And this still cut across, getting everyone accountable, be transparent with all the decisions in the company, right? Next is responsibility. So it is important to align management actions with startup goals and the broader interest of all stakeholders. So the responsibilities need to be set out. The responsibility and what needs to be done needs to be aligned, with what the management wants for the company, what the stakeholders, the shareholders of the company, what they actually want of the company. So everything needs to be aligned. Another key governance principle is independence. And this is saying that it is important to maintain an independent perspective in decision making, particularly at the board level. And how is applied? So this is applied majorly by appointing an independent director on your board, right? So while we have the executive director, we have the non-executive director, we should have an independent non-executive director. So this has to be someone with a level of expertise as it relates to the business of the company, but this person is neither nominated by a shareholder or the founder. So it is someone totally different, so that there won't be. So this is actually to avoid any form of bias in the decision making process of the company, because most of the times when we have a managing director appointed by the board, we would have non-executive director. So the managing director is usually the executive director. We have non-executive director that most of the times are representative of shareholders. So what we've seen in practice is that um, companies would actually give shareholders right to board representation, right? So the shareholder, but usually when we will say shareholders holding at least 10% of equity would have the right to nominate a non-executive director. So those that are minority can have a board observer seat. So what we are saying is, apart from those that are nominated by the shareholders, who are there for the interest of the shareholders, there should be someone that is independent of the shareholder or of the founder, that is just appointed by the board as an independent director in the company. So this is a key governance principle that should be adopted by all startups. All right. So how then do you establish a strong board of directors? Okay. So let's first look at the roles of the board in startup governance. So generally, the board they provide strategic oversight. So the board is responsible for guiding the startup strategic decisions and ensuring that management decisions align with the startup's long-term goals. Another thing they do is to oversee the risk management practice and to protect the startup's asset and reputation. So because the board of directors, right, the directors are people with expertise, industry experts, business experts. Some startups would even go ahead to like appoint politically exposed persons on their board, right, so that they can give them, direct insight. Perhaps there is like a government policy that can affect the business of the company. So these people are able to identify the risk and give them, best practice to protect and mitigate such risk. Another role of the board is the fiduciary duty role. So board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the startups and its shareholders. So how do you select board members? Number one, diverse expertise. It is important that you choose board members with mix of skills and experience relevant to the startup industry and the stage of your business, the stage of development. Another one is independence. So it is important to consider including independent directors who can provide objective oversight. I'm sure you could remember that is actually a governance principle that I shared recently. So independent director is very, very important. Secondly, how do you select cultural fit? Ensure board members align with the startup's value and culture. You just don't want to get someone on the board because of the position of of that individual, maybe in the society, or even if it's a politically exposed person, right? The person needs to align with your culture. The person needs to believe in the business and actually understand the business, or else the person would either not be really interested in the whole activity of the business or would just randomly give you advices or decisions that are not really in the best interest of the business. Um, another key thing you should look out for in selecting the right board member is network and resources. Ensure you bring board members who bring valuable network and resources, to the company and can provide additional support to the startups. What we've seen in this space is, I've seen a number of startups that will say we are adding this person as a member of the board because this person has a network of investors, right? And he or she would be able to introduce us to investors that can invest in the business. So you should, don't just appoint members of the board because you want to fill up the space. There should be people that can bring actual value to the company, either by the network that they have or the resources, knowledge that they can give to the company. All right. Effective. So how do the board functions, right? So the functions they function through, periodic board meetings where they make their decisions. So how do you make this effective? Number one, make sure the agendas are clear, right? Set clear and focused agenda to ensure a productive decisions. Trust me, these are busy people. They probably have a ton of other things they need to do. So you don't want to waste their time. Get the company secretary to have an agenda. What needs to be discussed? What are the key objectives of the business, right? So these need to be set out and shared with them prior before the meeting. Um, our rules here in Nigeria would say notice of meeting should be sent at least 14 days, 21 days before the meeting, depending on the type of meeting. Another thing is regular meeting is key, right? So it is important you schedule regular meeting. Ideally, board meetings, if it's not extraordinary on some important decisions, right? Board meetings should be like at least every quarter, right? So the board members should meet every quarter, to discuss and address, emerging issues of the company. Decision making process should also be spelled out, right? Establish a formal process for decision making. This can be voting, show of hand, or if it will be a decision by quota, stuff like that. So it needs to be spelled out. And the best way to do all this is to prepare and establish something called a board charter. We will talk about this shortly. Also, in every of your meeting, make sure the minutes of that board meeting is recorded, and decisions and the actions taken are recorded. This helps you to track what needs to be done and who needs to do it. All right. So I said, in order to establish a proper system to achieve all this, you need to prepare something called a board charter. So a board charter is a formal document that defines the structure, roles, and responsibility of the board of directors. It ensures effective governance by outlining how the board operates and makes decisions. And most often, the board charter would contain the composition and structure of the board, the roles and responsibility, meeting procedure, quorum, decision-making process, the director's duty, confidentiality, and conflict of interest, review and amendment, basically. So these are documents that needs to be established, right? So that the processes of the board can be streamlined and everyone can understand what they need to do to achieve the objective of the company. All right. And to make some certain decisions, right, companies go further to establish committees. So these committees are just selected members of the board, just separated into a subgroups. So they just see them as subgroups. So we can have a subgroup for audit, who oversees financial reporting and internal control. You have a subgroup for compensation, nomination and governance committee, and special committee. So um apart from having the general board, so the boards can also be broken down into subgroups of committees to oversee specific issues in the company. Okay, I need to move fast. All right. So there are two important pillars, right, in every company. So we have the board and we have the shareholders. So what we've talked about is the board. Now let's look at the shareholders. These are the owners of the business itself, right? So let's understand that the board are actually just acting in the best interest of the owners, which is the shareholders relationship. And as startups, right, as the startup grows, we have two friends coming in to start a business. And as the startup grows, we are now bringing in multiple investors, right? We are bringing in new people. So people from diverse culture with different interests in the company. Now, then, do you manage this relationship with these new guys, or even if it's your guy, your friend that you started the business with? All right. Now let's look at the type of shareholders and their expectations. So understanding their expectations will actually guide you on how to manage, the relationship you have with them. The first set of shareholders are the founders, right? So these guys would often have a long-term vision for the startups, and they prioritize growth over short-term profit. So how then do you manage the relationship? It is very, very important that you put in place a founders agreement. This would actually define the shares, the roles and responsibility, how the shares are being vested. Is it vesting? Is it period based or milestone? So this is actually best practice, right? Because we've seen situations where two people would start a company, and 6 months down the line, a second founder is acting all moody, is having mood swing, and is no longer feeling the business and want to exit. So what then would happen? So are we now leaving the shares for him, and just one founder will be putting in all the work, right? So having a founders agreement defines this set piece, right? So we have things like vesting, right? So the 100% of your shares would not vest immediately. It can vest over time, right? So if you leave prior to the um, closing of the vesting period, right? So the only portion of the shares you would get is the portion that has vested. And also, if you commit something maybe like a fraud or something that would undermine the business of the startup. In situations like that, you are going to forfeit your shares. So it is very important that terms like this are spelled out from the very beginning. Another set of founders are the angel investors, right? So these are typically high network individuals, and they expect high returns on investment. And most of the time, they may seek active involvement in the startups. So what they would most of the time request is a board seat, right? So we've seen most of the time we would have angel investors sign a SAFE. That's a simple agreement for future equity. And there'll be a side letter that says, oh, we want a board representation. We want to appoint someone as a member of the board, right? This is also similar to venture capitalists. They focus on scalability and exit strategies. So most of the time, they would often influence strategic decisions, in the business. Also by having a board representation, someone in the board of directors that can actually vote, on their behalf. We also have institutional investors, and we have employees. So most of the times, um, investors will advise that you have an employee stock option in place, right? So these are like key staffs that you want to protect and give them, reward of shares based on their work in the company. All right. So how do you manage the relationship with these guys? Communication with shareholders is very, very key, and it should be effective. If I can take you back a bit, I talked about transparency as a key governance principle. So transparency, I talked about information right? So this is just, you putting in place that information right that they actually have by effectively communicating with them. And how do you do this? By providing regular updates, right? Provide consistent updates on the startup performance and strategies for milestones. So this update can be a monthly reporting, can be bi-monthly, can be quarterly. So it's something that needs to be decided in the company. Transparency, it is important to be transparent about challenges and setbacks, not just success, right? Tell the shareholders if there is any problem in the business, let them know. You'll be surprised that they can actually know someone that can, help you set out the solution, right? There are situations where startups, they would actually miscalculate their runway and they become exhausted, right? And we've seen situations where existing shareholders would be kind enough to give maybe an abridged finance or an abridged loan, to keep the business going. So don't just share success because you feel that is what they need to hear. Let them know the challenges that you are facing, and you'll be surprised that they also don't want their investment to go bad. So they would be happy to help. So engage shareholders on key decisions, especially those that impact their interest. Also, it's 2025. Use technology, leverage technology to, for efficient and effective communication. Virtual meetings are now, permissible. So digital reporting, just make sure you keep them on the know. Communication is very key. All right. So most of the time there are, it's inevitable anyway. There are dispute between shareholders and the management, new shareholders and existing shareholders, right? Majority, minority. So how do you prevent all this type of disputes? Put a preventive measures in place. I mentioned this earlier, right? At the very early beginning, set clear expectations and policy upfront, and this can be done through shareholders agreement or founders agreement. Make sure these things are in place from the very beginning. Also, in resolving disputes, because you want to maintain the relationship, right, regardless of how weird the issue is, you should actually explore mediation and arbitration, negotiation, mediation and arbitration before exploring to litigation, right? There is a high chance that relationships can be maintained when disputes are resolved through alternative dispute resolution instead of just escalating it to litigation. And another way to actually do this is to ensure that the clauses in your agreement should state mediation or arbitration first before disputes are referred to a competent court. Also, clauses like buyout clause should be um, included in in your agreement. This help to undo deadlock or exit situations. Um, as a last resort, pursue legal action to enforce shareholders' right. So just ensure you seek alternative dispute resolution before engaging the court. All right. So we've mentioned shareholders' agreement. Um, what are the importance, right? So shareholders' agreement is been known to protect the interests of the shareholders, right? It clearly defines the rights, the obligation of the shareholders, and protect their interests. It also outlines, the procedures, right, for shareholders exit, including preemption right, drag along right, and all, right? So if the company is seeking to raise, further capital, a preemption right, a preemption right would state that you need to notify the existing shareholders first, to so that they can let you know if they are willing to buy more shares, before giving it out to third parties. Um, Shareholders agreement would also, among other things, spell out the voting rights, how a decision taken, what are the process. So this is put in place to avoid conflict. There is also transfer restrictions. You don't just want a shareholder to decide that, oh, I want to sell my shares unilaterally. So there's a transfer restriction. The shares are restricted, to maintain control and stability. If a shareholder is willing to sell, his or her shares, they should actually inform the company first, and it needs to be approved, right? So these also allow the company to maintain control, right? What we've seen in the space is that clauses like that are drafted in a way where the company should be able to just purchase it back, right? So you can make the shares redeemable. All right. So governance challenges and best practices. Okay, my time is almost up. Let's just quickly round up. So, what are the common governance challenges that we've seen, and how can you overcome these challenges? So, one, we've seen the tussle between shareholders control, shareholders control, and board oversight. So there is usually usually a tussle between balancing founders' control with the need of independent oversight. This can actually be challenging, right? So these are common issues that we face. Another thing is resource constraint. Um, So resource constraint, so limited resources may actually also lead to inadequate governance structure, and this is only common to very early stage startups, right? Because there are sometimes that the board would actually need to be remunerated, right? You actually need to pay them, if it by seating or some form of equity. So these are other challenges. We also have rapid growth. As startups grow quickly, governance structure can become outdated or inefficient. So there is a need to, redefine the structure periodically based on the growth of the business. Another one is conflict of interest. So managing conflict of interest among board members, investors, and management can also be an issue. That is why it is very important to, select your board right, right? So look at people that actually have the best interests of the company at heart before appointing them, not just because of their status, right? So these are things to put in place. So what are the best practice to avoid these issues? Early implementation. So establish governance structure early enough in the company. So put in place all those agreements that we've talked about, the board charter and all those things, ensure they are in place. Continuous review. Um, Companies are expected to regularly review and update their governance practice and policies, right, to ensure they remain relevant and not outdated. Training and development. Provide governance training for board members and key executives, right? There are people that actually don't really know what it entails. You need to remind them of their roles and responsibility. You need to remind them of the need and importance to be transparent and accountable. You need to remind them of, all these key governance principle and how it can affect the growth and investor confidence, right, in the company. And lastly, stakeholders' involvement. So it is very important that you involve key stakeholders in governance discussions and decisions. This also still speaks to the principle of transparency and independence, right? You need to carry everyone along. All right. So I believe this is the last one. Okay, we're almost done. Um, Governance framework and tools. So the law has actually established a number of framework that can guide effective corporate governance, principle and management in companies. And an example of this is the Corporate Governance Code. So I know in Nigeria and across Africa, there are corporate governance codes, that have been established, relevant corporate governance codes and best practices guidelines. And what we've also seen is that most of the time there might be specific codes depending on the industry, but it's actually not an entirely different guideline, right? It's still, they are just code reiterating the same principle of accountability, independent transparency, and just adding up some key things that are peculiar to those sector and industry. I know there is code for insurance, there is code for the banking space, right? So like that. So it's important to get acquainted with all these codes so that you can establish an effective corporate governance structure and framework for the company. Another tool is governance audit. So it is important to consider a regular governance audit to assess the effectiveness of the governance practice. Okay, so this can be done annually or whatever agreed period the company decides, right? So that to check, okay, the one that we did before, has it been working? What can we do to make it better, right? So this periodic audit needs to be done. And finally, governance manual. So it is important to develop governance manual that outlines policies and procedures and best practice for the board and management. And this is actually speaking to the board charter that I mentioned. So the board charter is like an in-house code, it's like an in-house guideline that guides the activity of the board. So when you have things like this in place, right, it can easily be you can easily go back to it when some key decisions are not clear or you're not clear about the processes of what needs to be done, right? So when you see it, it's okay, we can retrace, the step of the board. Okay, this is not done right. This is how it needs to be done. So establishing all these tools and framework is very important to ensure effective governance in startups. All right. So, in conclusion, good governance is essential for startup success as it provides the foundation for sustainable growth, investor confidence, and long-term value creation. And by establishing strong governance structure early on and continuously adapting them as the startups evolve, founders can ensure that their startup remain on the path to success. That'll be all from me. Thank you very much. I'll take your questions now.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Oladimeji. It's such an insightful session. So we'll go straight to the Q&A section. So the first question comes from Mr. Peter from Uganda. His question is, as a single member company, do I need a board of directors? And how do I constitute the board of directors?
Hi, Trevor. Can you hear me? I lost
Yeah,
you a bit.
I can hear you.
All right. So you said there's a question from Mr. Peter from Uganda. Can you take the question again, please?
Okay, I think Trevor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you can take the question. You're not audible before.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the question is from Peter in Uganda. He's asking, as a single member company, does it need a board of directors? And how do I constitute the board of directors and how many members?
Okay. As a single founder, right? Um, it is recommended that you can have you can just have an advisory board, right? So I'm sure when you're preparing your pitch deck, so what we've seen in situations like that is to just have reputable um industry experts, right? It can even be fellow founders, it can be another founder, someone just that has an industry expert, because when you're submitting your pitch deck for investment raise, the investor want to see that you are not alone, number one, that you are not alone and you actually have people with the right knowledge to guide you through the process. So even if it's just one person or two-person, right, you can just appoint them as, oh, they are our advisor, and just impute them in your pitch deck as an advisory member, as an advisor member of the company. And um how do you constitute one? So at the very early stage, you can just have maybe yourself and two other person, since you are at the very early stage. So it can be yourself and two other person. And how do you can just um I have startup that they literally just go on LinkedIn, search for industry experts and speak to them. Okay, I would like you to be. In fact, I've had tons of messages like that. Okay, based on your industry, based on your expertise, I would like to be an advisor to our company. It's actually easy than you think it is. Just speak to them, send them a message, and just let them know you want to have them on board, because you won't be disturbing them every day. So it's just a periodic meeting, can be once in a month, just run them through some of the decisions you are trying to make. And this actually boosts, the investors' confidence in investing in you.
Okay, great. So we have another question from Karanu, and the question is, what is the best strategy when an angel stroke venture investor tries to change the primary objective of the startup and turn it into an entirely different entity?
Well, so so what I have actually seen situations like this before, and my advice is the angel investor, whatever they are telling you, see it as a suggestion, see it as something that just needs to be deliberated, right? And this is why I've worked in venture capital firms, and because of our role, we receive hundreds, if not thousands, of pitch decks, right? And so there are these angel investors or venture capitalists, whoever your investors are, most of the time they are not working alone. They have analysts working with them. They have analysts that have reviewed thousands of businesses, and based on their appraisal, they have an idea of what will scale and what may not. They have an idea of what you can do better to position the business and what you shouldn't. So when don't see it, don't always see those type of advice as they trying to change the entire situation of the company, but see it as an advice of they suggesting some new type of way to, to achieve the goal of the business, right? So when you see from the point that, okay, this is a suggestion that needs to be deliberated, then you can now deliberate on it, right? So as I said, the principle of corporate governance provides that decisions should not just be unilaterally made. So they still can't just unilaterally make that decision. Everyone needs to be aligned. So if you now think through it and you feel that doesn't align with the goal of the business, then you don't have to. But if it does align in a way, then you can just, marry a little bit of the suggestion and try, right? And there is always the market fit stage, the go to market stage, right? Or the testing phase where you can just test out the ideas. And another thing you should also do is you can use surveys. I think people, startups do that as well. You can also carry out survey to actually test out if this new product idea could work and all that. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you for that. I have another two questions from KS, and the first question is, what are examples of governance failures in startups, and what can we learn from them? And the second question is, what governance policies should I have in place before bringing on investors and or partners?
Okay. Governance failures. So that would thank you for the question, by the way. So that would take us back to some of the principle. So governance failure would simply be the absence of, most of these principles, right? So let's start from something as simple as agreement. Um, we've seen situations where two founders will start a company. In fact, there is a recent situation like that where we have two founders in a company. We have the CEO and I think the CTO or CEO, and they've actually been looking to I think they joined an accelerator program, and the CEO has been working himself out, is literally being the one speaking with investors, going back and forth, attending the accelerator program meeting, and eventually they got listed as finalists in the accelerator program, right? And guess who had to go and to do a presentation in, was it Dubai, or I can't remember? I think it was Dubai also. It was the CEO that has never been in attendance. So he started creating, a grudge and tussle in the business, and the CEO was like, "Oh, I've actually been the one doing all the work, right? And I'm even owning lesser equity." So when you have terms, roles, and responsibilities set out from the very beginning, it stops all those type of disputes because everyone knows what they need to do. And another good thing about milestone vesting is that when you don't do what you need to do, your shares don't vest. So it puts you on your toe to actually put in the work. So you are not just on the cap table because you have an idea, or you are not just on the cap table because, oh, the co-founder is your friend. If you are on the cap table, you should earn it. So that is why vesting are very important. So you should actually do the work. So policy you should put in place, start with the agreement, founders agreement, shareholders agreement, what needs to be done. Have your board charter in place. How are decisions made? Who need to constitute the board? If we are bringing in new shareholders, do they have right to appoint a director in the board? So all these are policies that need to put in place. Spell out your transparency principles. Before you make a decisions, we need to pass a resolution. We who need to sign that resolution. Have a framework where any agreement or any strategic partnership will not be valid unless there is a solution, there is a resolution approving such decision by so and so. So those are policies to put in place, that will ensure the company avoid governance failures.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have another question from Miss Nancy Wahithera, and her question is, what is the ideal number of board members for a startup?
All right. So depending on the stage and depending on the industry, the minimum should be three. We can start from three. So by three, we have the executive director, who is the CEO. You have a non-executive director, who can be maybe a COO or any other person in the company, and most importantly, an independent non-executive director. This is someone that does not own a share in the company, that does not have any relationship with any shareholder, is just independent. So this create the balance. This would ensure that you have um, a balanced decision making process, someone that can make decision without any bias. So minimum number three, minimum number three, then you can go ahead and have quite whatever number after that. But minimum number three, the executive, the non-executive, and the independent non-executive director.
Great, great. So we have another question from Agromet Limited, and the question is how to establish a board when you don't have enough finance. As a startup, can the shareholders solely be board of directors without outsiders?
Oh, great question. Great question. Because that's actually one of the challenges. I talked about lack of resources as one of the challenges, and yeah, it's actually a very valid question. Yes, the shareholders can constitute the board at the very early beginning, but you should just try, just try, and have an independent director. And how can you make up? This is the trick. This is the very trick. Now, there is no compensation. You're actually still looking for funds. Give them equity. And how should you do this? Every company should actually establish an employee stock option. So an option pool is like you separating maybe 10% of your shares, which you'll be given to um, key members, key stars of the company because of their value. So from that pool, even if it's a 1% or a 0.5%, propose it to the advisor, right? It works. Trust me, it works. So you don't just let them understand. We don't have the liquidity at the moment, but we are willing to offer you equity, you know, for the role. it works, trust me. So that's a way to get someone on board. So you can just get one person that will be an independent person with industry expert, someone that could actually give you value. So that would be my advice.
Oh, great, great. So I think because of time, I think I'll take one last question from Mr. Collins, and he's asking, can you throw more light on the difference between independence and fairness, both as key governance principles?
Okay. So independence. Okay, can you throw more light on? Okay. So independence and fairness. So we can literally just tie it to other governance principles such as transparency. So one, let's break it down. So from independence, so independence is saying in your decision making, you should actually have someone that can make an independent decision, someone that can make a decision that is non-biased, right? And most times, this would be the appointed independent non-executive director, right? Someone that is not tied to any shareholder, that is not tied to any other director, someone that is just solely appointed because of his or her expertise in that industry. And fairness is establishing principles that protects everyone. And how is this applicable? So when you have clauses like preemptive rights, information rights in your shareholders agreement, that's fair. And what that says is, an example is you can't just transfer shares to a third party without informing existing shareholder, right? It would be unfair to the existing shareholder to just bring in someone outside, right? And maybe this person is even coming in to purchase a majority percentage shares in the company. So it is only fair you actually offer such shares to the existing shareholder. Ask them first. Okay, I'm divesting a portion of my shares. Would you like to buy? So that is fairness. Fairness is also in can be linked to the information rights of a shareholder. Take for example, the company is actually in the midst of maybe a merger or an acquisition decision making, right? And the investors are not involved in that entire process, and they only get to know when the process has been completed, and they are just given maybe some portion of their shares. What could have happened when such information are not shared is the transaction could have been badly negotiated. It could have been negotiated, in the best interest of the so-called key negotiator or the majority shareholder, right? Without taking into consideration the interest of the minority shareholder or other stakeholders of the company. So this is actually where the principle of independence and fairness take effect, and it's applicable and its application to corporate governance in general. And the risk of this is we've seen weird situation where existing shareholders start filing a lawsuit, which invariably affects the reputation of the company or can even stall the or disrupt the entire transaction. So fairness, independence is very key.
Okay, so thank you so much. I think we'll end the session here. So I want to thank you again, Mr. Oladimeji, for this such an insightful session, and we really appreciate that you took time to be with us today. I want to thank the participants again that you have joined today. So if you have further questions, you'll follow him on his socials, as you can see on the flyer that is there, or send him an email or something. So yeah, and I also want to thank you then Tip and then Nomfro Technologies to actually make this live session a success. So I will pass to Miss Jessica. Do you have anything to add on this?
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Mr. Ola, for that wonderful session. It was really insightful. I learned a lot, and I believe the participants learned quite a lot as well. So thank you once again, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Please do all to check back to the YouTube video for your attendance. Attendance is very important. And also, Mr. Ola's details will also be in the description box, so you can look it up and then message him with further questions or if you need his services as well. But from us at NTEEP, thank you and see you again tomorrow.